Here's a simple question. You think modern dating is hard? You think swiping left, dealing with ghosting, and decoding 3-word text messages is tough? Let me introduce you to medieval romance, where your father chooses your spouse, your wedding night is a public spectacle, and the closest thing to a first date is standing awkwardly in a church while a priest negotiates your bride price like your livestock at a market. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where love is optional, marriage is a business transaction, and your romantic prospects are determined less by chemistry and more by how many pigs your family owns. This isn't Netflix, this isn't a fairy tale. This is medieval dating, and you wouldn't last a week. Before we dive into the brutal reality of medieval romance, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Because if you think hearing about courtship rituals involving blood-stained bedsheets and arranged marriages at age 12 is wild, just wait until we get to the part about consummation witnesses. Let's start with a simple truth. You don't date in the Middle Ages, you get assigned. The entire concept of dating, choosing someone you're attracted to, spending time getting to know them, deciding if you're compatible, that's a modern fantasy that would make a medieval person laugh until they choked on their turnip soup. In medieval Europe, marriage isn't about love, it's about land, alliances, wealth, and continuing the family line. You're not looking for your soulmate, you're looking for someone whose father owns the adjacent field, whose dowry includes 3 cows and a decent wool operation, or whose family name might elevate your social standing from mud farmer to slightly less muddy farmer. And here's the kicker. You probably won't meet your future spouse until the day you marry them. That's right. No coffee dates, no texting for 3 months, no awkward small talk about hobbies. Just, here's your wife, she's 13, you've never spoken, good luck. If you're nobility, it's even worse. Your marriage was likely arranged when you were still in diapers. Your parents shook hands over your cradle, agreed on terms, and boom, you're engaged to a stranger you won't meet for another 15 years. Romance? Please, you're a political pawn with a dowry. For peasants, there's slightly more freedom, but only slightly. You might actually know your future spouse. Maybe they live in the same village. Maybe you've seen them at church or working in the fields. But even then, your parents are making the final call. Because marriage isn't about what you want, it's about what the family needs. And if you're thinking, well, at least I could run away with my true love, think again. Eloping is scandalous, socially destructive, and in some cases illegal. Your family could disown you, the church could excommunicate you, and your romantic partner's family might literally hunt you down. Medieval love stories don't end with sunset kisses. They end with exile, poverty, or a very angry father with a very sharp sword. So forget everything you know about modern dating. Forget choice, forget chemistry, forget that butterflies in your stomach feeling. In the Middle Ages, marriage is a contract, and you're the product being sold. Chapter 1. Childhood betrothals and the art of selling your toddler. Let's say you're born into a noble family in medieval Europe. Congratulations. You're rich, you'll never starve, and your future is already ruined. Because before you can even speak in full sentences, your parents are negotiating your marriage. That's right. While you're learning to walk, they're deciding who you'll spend the rest of your life with, and you have absolutely no say in the matter. Childhood betrothals are common, especially among the aristocracy. These aren't romantic gestures, they're strategic alliances. Your marriage links 2 families, secures land rights, ends feuds, or consolidates power. You're not a person, you're a chess piece. Let's say you're a 5-year-old girl named Eleanor. Your father, a minor lord, wants to improve his standing. He arranges for you to marry the 12-year-old son of a wealthier nobleman. Contracts are drawn up, dowries are negotiated. Maybe your father throws in a manor, some farmland, and a few barrels of wine. In exchange, your future husband's family agrees to protect your family's interests and maybe not invade your lands. The deal is sealed, you're engaged, and you won't see your future husband for another decade. Here's the thing. Medieval people aren't stupid. They know a 5-year-old can't consent to marriage. So, these betrothals come with conditions. The actual marriage ceremony happens later, usually when the girl reaches 12 or 13 and the boy's old enough to, well, fulfill his marital duties. But that betrothal contract is binding. Break it, and there are consequences. Financial penalties, family dishonour, and political fallout. Your parents signed you away and you're stuck. And it's not just nobility. Merchant families, wealthy craftsmen, and even some prosperous peasants arrange marriages for their children. Because marriage is the ultimate business deal. It's about securing wealth, ensuring inheritance and building networks. Love is irrelevant. Now, let's say you're that 12-year-old boy. You've been told since childhood that you're engaged to Eleanor, a girl you've never met. Maybe you've exchanged a letter or two, carefully written and monitored by your parents. Maybe you've seen a portrait, assuming your family could afford one, but more likely you know nothing about her except her name and her family's assets. The wedding day arrives, you meet for the first time. She's a stranger, you're a stranger, and tonight you're expected to consummate this marriage while half the household listens outside the door to make sure you do it right. Romantic? Hardly. But that's medieval marriage. It's not about connection, it's about obligation. And here's the worst part. Even if you end up hating each other, divorce is almost impossible. The Catholic Church controls marriage, and they don't believe in do-overs. You're stuck for life. So you better hope your parents chose well, because you're spending the next 50 years with someone you didn't pick and might not even like. But wait, it gets worse. Let's talk about the wedding night. Chapter 2. Courtly Love and the Fantasy of Romance. Now, before you think medieval life is entirely devoid of romance, let me introduce you to Courtly Love, the medieval version of a romance novel. Except it's not about marriage. It's about desire you can't have, longing you can't fulfill, and a whole lot of poetic suffering. Courtly love emerges in the 12th century, mostly in France, among the aristocracy. It's a literary and social phenomenon where knights worship noble women from afar, write them love poems, perform brave deeds in their honour, and, crucially, never actually consummate the relationship. That's right. Courtly love is about unfulfilled desire. The whole point is that the love is impossible. Maybe the lady is already married. Maybe she's of higher social rank. Maybe she's just not interested. Doesn't matter. The knight suffers beautifully, pines dramatically, and writes sonnets about her eyes. Think of it like medieval fan fiction, except everyone's pretending it's real. Here's how it works. You're a young knight. Let's call you Geoffrey. You become enamoured with Lady Isabella, the wife of your lord. She's beautiful, cultured, and completely out of reach. So, you dedicate yourself to her. You wear her colours in tournaments. You compose love songs. You might even carry a token of hers, a handkerchief or a ribbon, into battle. And Lady Isabella? She enjoys the attention. She might grant you small favours, a kind word, a smile, permission to sit near her at a feast. But that's it. Physical intimacy? Absolutely not. That would ruin the whole thing. Because courtly love isn't about sex. It's about the ache of longing, the beauty of restraint, the nobility of suffering for an unattainable ideal. It's emotional theatre. And weirdly, this is celebrated. Troubadours, the medieval equivalent of singer-songwriters, make entire careers out of singing about impossible love. They perform at courts, entertaining nobles with tales of knights who die of heartbreak, ladies who inspire devotion but never reciprocate, and love that exists only in the realm of fantasy. But here's the catch. This is almost exclusively a noble pastime. Peasants don't have time for courtly love. They're too busy not starving. Courtly love requires leisure, education, and a complete detachment from the reality of survival. Also, it's often adulterous. The lady you're pining for, she's married, and you, the knight, might be married too. But courtly love operates in a weird moral space where emotional infidelity is romantic and physical infidelity is, well, still a sin, but one people are willing to flirt with. The church is not a fan. They view courtly love as dangerous, a gateway to actual adultery, which is a mortal sin. But the nobility doesn't care. They keep writing the poems, hosting the tournaments, and indulging in this elaborate game of emotional chess. And that's what it is, a game. Courtly love has rules. The Andreas Capellanus, a 12th century writer, literally wrote a handbook called The Art of Courtly Love, Slängska Hand, laying out the principles. Love must be secretive. It must be difficult. It must involve jealousy. Here's how it works. You're a young knight. Let's call you Geoffrey. You become enamoured with Lady Isabella, the wife of your lord. She's beautiful, cultured, and completely out of reach. So, you dedicate yourself to her. You wear her colours in tournaments. You compose love songs. You might even carry a token of hers, a handkerchief or a ribbon, into battle. And Lady Isabella? She enjoys the attention. She might grant you small favours, a kind word, a smile, permission to sit near her at a feast. But that's it. Physical intimacy? Absolutely not. That would ruin the whole thing. Because courtly love isn't about sex. It's about the ache of longing, the beauty of restraint, the nobility of suffering for an unattainable ideal. It's emotional theatre. And weirdly, this is celebrated. Troubadours, the medieval equivalent of singer-songwriters, make entire careers out of singing about impossible love. They perform at courts, entertaining nobles with tales of knights who die of heartbreak, ladies who inspire devotion but never reciprocate, and love that exists only in the realm of fantasy. But here's the catch. This is almost exclusively a noble pastime. Peasants don't have time for courtly love. They're too busy not starving. Courtly love requires leisure, education, and a complete detachment from the reality of survival. Also, it's often adulterous. The lady you're pining for, she's married, and you, the knight, might be married too. But courtly love operates in a weird moral space where emotional infidelity is romantic and physical infidelity is, well, still a sin, but one people are willing to flirt with. The church is not a fan. They view courtly love as dangerous, a gateway to actual adultery, which is a mortal sin. But the nobility doesn't care. They keep writing the poems, hosting the tournaments, and indulging in this elaborate game of emotional chess. And that's what it is, a game. Courtly love has rules. The Andreas Capellanus, a 12th century writer, literally wrote a handbook called The Art of Courtly Love, Slängsgehand, laying out the principles. Love must be secretive. It must be difficult. It must involve jealousy, suffering, and longing. And it must, above all, remain unconsummated. So if you're a medieval noble, you might have two relationships. Your marriage, which is practical, political, and loveless, and your courtly love affair, which is emotional, poetic, and entirely chaste. It's like having a spouse and a parasocial relationship with a celebrity, except the celebrity knows you exist and occasionally lets you joust in their honour. But let's be clear, courtly love doesn't change the reality of medieval marriage. It's an escape, a fantasy, a literary genre. Real marriages are still arranged, still loveless, and still focused on producing heirs and managing property. Courtly love is the dream. Marriage is the job. Chapter 3. Peasant courtship, or how to woo someone with a turnip. All right, let's leave the nobles and their poetic suffering behind and talk about everyone else. The peasants, the craftsmen, the regular people who make up 90% of medieval society. If you're a peasant, your romantic life is very different from the aristocracy. You don't have troubadours, you don't have tournaments, you have mud, labour, and the faint hope that someone in your village doesn't smell worse than you do. Peasant courtship is practical. You're not looking for a soulmate. You're looking for a work partner, someone who can help you run the farm, raise children, and survive the relentless grind of medieval life. And unlike nobles, you might actually have some choice in who you marry. Not total freedom, your parents still have a say, but if you're lucky, they'll at least let you marry someone you've met. Let's say you're a young peasant man named Thomas. You're 16, you work your family's land, and you've had your eye on Margaret, the daughter of a neighbouring farmer. You've seen her, at church maybe exchanged a few words at the village well. She seems strong, healthy and capable. Perfect. But you can't just ask her out. There's a process. First, you need to make your intentions known. Maybe you start helping her family with their harvest. Maybe you accidentally run into her more often. Maybe you bring her family a gift, some extra grain, a basket of eggs, a nice turnip. Yes, a turnip. This is medieval courtship. Romance is a root vegetable. If Margaret's family is interested, they'll start paying attention to you. They'll assess whether you're a good match. Do you have land? Are you healthy? Can you provide for a family? Are you known for being lazy or violent? Because those are deal breakers. Your reputation matters enormously. The village is small. Everyone knows everyone. If you've been caught stealing, if you're known for getting drunk and starting fights, if you've shirked your labour obligations to the Lord, Margaret's family will know, and they'll reject you. Because choosing the wrong spouse doesn't just affect Margaret, it affects the entire family. If you turn out to be lazy, her parents might end up supporting both of you. If you're violent, she could be in danger. If you're unlucky, cursed, or associated with bad fortune, that could spread to their household. So they watch you. They ask around. They assess your character through the lens of village gossip, which is the medieval equivalent of a background check. Meanwhile, Margaret might have her own opinion. Maybe she likes you, maybe she doesn't. but her parents' approval matters more. Because marriage is about the family's survival, not her personal happiness. But here's where peasant courtship differs from noble arrangements. Margaret's opinion does count for something. If she absolutely refuses you, if she's terrified of you or despises you, her parents might reconsider. Because an unwilling wife makes for a miserable household, and miserable households are unproductive. So you need to win her over too, not just her family. How? By demonstrating your worth. The church court, run by local clergy, handles moral offences. Fornication is one of the most common cases they see. If you're caught having sex before marriage, you'll be summoned, questioned, and judged. The punishment varies. Sometimes it's a fine, a few pennies or a chicken paid to the church. Sometimes it's public penance standing outside the church in a white sheet while everyone stares and whispers. Sometimes it's physical, a whipping or time in the stocks, and the shame lasts. The village remembers. You become known as the fornicator, the loose woman, the man who couldn't control himself. Future marriage prospects suffer. Your family's reputation takes a hit. But here's the thing, people are still people. Despite the rules, despite the supervision, premarital sex happens, a lot. Records from church courts show constant cases of couples being punished for fornication. Sometimes they're forced to marry. Sometimes they're publicly whipped. Sometimes they're fined. But the fact that the church keeps punishing it means people keep doing it. Why risk it? Because desire is powerful. Because young people, working side by side in fields, seeing each other day after day, develop feelings. Because the courtship period can drag on for months or even years, and waiting is hard. And sometimes it's strategic. If a woman gets pregnant, the families will force a marriage. So, if you're worried your parents might change their minds, if there's another suitor they prefer, getting pregnant can lock in the match. It's risky, but it works. So let's say you and Margaret sneak off one night. Maybe during a harvest festival when everyone's drunk on ale. Maybe in a barn, maybe in the woods. It's risky, it's uncomfortable, and it's over quickly. But it happens. The barn is dark, filled with the smell of hay and animal dung. There's no privacy, just the hope that no one wanders by. You're both nervous, fumbling, awkward. This isn't the passionate romance of stories. It's quick, uncomfortable, and carried out with the constant fear of being discovered. And if Margaret gets pregnant, congratulations, you're getting married immediately, no questions asked. Because illegitimate children are a social disaster, and the community will pressure you to make it right. This is called a shotgun wedding, except instead of a shotgun, it's the collective judgment of your entire village and the threat of eternal damnation. The wedding is rushed, quiet, almost shameful. Everyone knows why you're marrying suddenly. The priest gives you a stern lecture. Your families are disappointed but resigned. You've forced their hand. But if there's no pregnancy, you might just get away with it. Keep it quiet, don't get caught, and eventually you'll have a proper church wedding. And here's the fascinating thing. Despite all the church's rules and the community's surveillance, premarital sex is shockingly common. Studies of medieval church records show that a significant percentage of brides were already pregnant on their wedding day. Some estimates suggest up to 30% in certain regions. So, while the official story is chastity and purity, the reality is messier, more human, more real. Young people find ways. They sneak off during festivals. They meet in fields during work. They take advantage of moments when supervision lapses, and then they either get caught and face consequences, or they don't, and eventually marry anyway. It's a game of risk and reward, and plenty of people decide the reward is worth the risk. Which brings us to the next phase, the actual wedding. Chapter 4. Medieval weddings, public humiliation, and bedsheet inspections. All right, you've made it through courtship. You've been assigned a spouse, or maybe you actually like them. Either way, it's time to get married. And let me tell you, medieval weddings are nothing like the elegant ceremonies you see in movies. There's no white dress, no flower arrangements, no open bar, just a priest, some witnesses, and a whole lot of social pressure to make sure you consummate this thing properly. Let's start with the ceremony itself. If you're wealthy, you might get married in a church. But for most people, weddings happen at the church door, literally on the steps outside. Why? Because the inside of the church is sacred, and marriage, while important, is considered a worldly contract. So you stand outside in the cold, in front of your entire community and make your vows. The priest asks if you consent. You say yes. Your spouse says yes. Rings are exchanged if you can afford them. Vows are spoken, and that's it. You're married. No kiss, by the way, that's not a thing yet. Then everyone goes inside for a mass. Prayers are said. Blessings are given. And then the real event begins. The feast. If your family has money, the wedding feast is a big deal. There's food, ale, music, dancing. It's one of the few times medieval people actually celebrate. But even here, the focus isn't on romance. It's on displaying wealth and status. The more extravagant the feast, the more important your family appears. So, there's roasted meat, pies, bread, and if you're really fancy, maybe some imported spices. Everyone eats, drinks, and makes speeches about fertility and duty. And then comes the part everyone's been waiting for, the bedding ceremony. Yes, you read that right. Your wedding night is not private. After the feast, the guests escort you and your new spouse to the bedroom. They make jokes, they sing bawdy songs, and they literally watch you get into bed. Some traditions involve the guests undressing the bride and groom. Others involve priests blessing the bed. Some involve throwing the bride's stocking, because medieval people had very specific ideas about fertility rituals. And then, once you're in bed, the guests leave. Finally. Except not really. Because in many cases, especially among nobility, there are witnesses who wait outside the door, or in some cases in the room, their job, to confirm that the marriage has been consummated. How do they confirm this? By checking the bedsheets in the morning. Yes, the bedsheets. They're looking for blood, proof that the bride was a virgin and that the marriage has been physically completed. If there's no blood, questions are asked. Was she not a virgin? Is the marriage invalid? Did the groom fail to perform? This is humiliating, invasive, and completely normal. For noble families, the stakes are even higher. The legitimacy of heirs depends on proving that the marriage was consummated. So, witnesses might be high-ranking officials, clergy, or family members. They take their jobs seriously. And if the groom can't perform, disaster. Impotence is grounds for annulment. The marriage can be declared invalid, and the groom's reputation is destroyed. Some men are literally put on trial, required to prove their sexual capability in front of a court. Medieval marriage is not romantic. It's a public contract with a performance review. But let's say everything goes smoothly. The marriage is consummated, the witnesses are satisfied, the blood-stained sheet is displayed, or discreetly disposed of, depending on the family's preferences. Congratulations, you're officially married. Now comes the hard part, staying married. Chapter 5. Married Life, or Why Divorce Isn't an Option. So, you're married. Maybe you like your spouse, maybe you don't. Either way, you're stuck. Because in medieval Europe, divorce doesn't really exist. The Catholic Church controls marriage, and they believe it's a sacrament, a sacred bond that cannot be broken. What God has joined together, let no man separate. That's not suggestion. That's the law. So even if your spouse is abusive, unfaithful, or just utterly incompatible, you can't divorce them. You're married for life. But there are loopholes. The big one is annulment. An annulment declares that the marriage was never valid in the first place. It's not a divorce. It's a legal fiction that says, oops, this marriage never actually happened. But getting an annulment is difficult. You need a reason, a legitimate one recognized by the church. The most common reasons are consanguinity. You and your spouse are too closely related. The church has strict rules about marrying relatives, and if you can prove you're within the prohibited degrees of kinship, the marriage can be annulled. Affinity. One of you had a previous sexual relationship with a relative of the other. Yes, this counts. Impotence. If the marriage was never consummated because one party is physically incapable, it can be annulled. Coercion. If one party was forced into the marriage against their will, it can be invalidated, though proving coercion is hard when almost all marriages are arranged. Pre-contract. If one party was already engaged or married to someone else, the second, marriage is invalid. These rules sound straightforward, but in practice they're weaponized. Nobles use annulments to escape politically inconvenient marriages. They hire lawyers to dig up distant family connections, claim impotence, or fabricate evidence of coercion. And if you're rich enough, you can even petition the Pope for a special dispensation. It's expensive, it's complicated, but it's possible. For peasants, forget it. You don't have the money or the connections, you're stuck. So what do unhappy couples do? Some just separate informally. They stop living together, but they're still legally married. The church disapproves, but if you're discreet, you might get away with it. Others commit adultery. Risky, because if you're caught, the consequences are severe. Public shaming, fines, whipping, even excommunication. But people do it anyway. And some just endure. They live together in quiet misery, fulfilling their marital duties, raising children, and counting the days, until death does them part. Because medieval marriage isn't about happiness, it's about duty. Your job as a husband is to provide, protect, and produce heirs. Your job as a wife is to obey, manage the household, and bear children. Love is optional, compatibility is irrelevant. You do your duty and you don't complain. And if you do complain, society has no sympathy. Marriage is hard. Of course it is. Life is hard. Get over it. The church reinforces this constantly. Sermons emphasize obedience, patience, and self-sacrifice. Women are told to submit to their husbands. Men are told to rule their households with firm but fair authority. And domestic violence? Totally acceptable, within limits. Husbands are allowed to discipline their wives. As long as you don't kill her or cause permanent injury, it's considered your right. Women have almost no recourse. If you're being abused, you can appeal to the church, but they'll likely just tell you to be a better wife. Maybe you provoked him. Maybe you need to pray more. The legal system is no better. Women can't own property independently. They can't sign contracts. They can't testify in court without a male guardian. You're legally a dependent, basically a child, no matter your age. So, if your marriage is miserable, you endure, you pray, you hope your spouse dies young so you can remarry, preferably to someone better. And that's medieval marriage. It's not a partnership, it's a hierarchy, and you better hope you're not at the bottom. Chapter 6. Sex, Sin, and the Church's Bedroom Surveillance. Let's talk about sex, because in the Middle Ages, even in marriage, sex is heavily regulated by the church, and the church has a lot of opinions about what you can and cannot do in bed. First, the basic rule: sex is for procreation only. That's it. The purpose of marital sex is to make babies. Pleasure, irrelevant. Enjoyment, suspicious. If you're having sex for any reason other than continuing the family line, you're sinning. The church is very clear on this. Sex is a necessary evil. It's allowed within marriage because humans need to reproduce, but it's still tainted by lust, and lust is a sin. So even as a married couple, you're supposed to approach sex with reluctance, duty, and as little enthusiasm as possible. And the rules don't stop there. The church regulates when, how, and how often you can have sex. When? Not on Sundays, not on holy days, not during Lent, which is 40 days, not during Advent, which is 4 weeks, not on Wednesdays or Fridays, days of fasting, not during your wife's menstrual period, pregnancy, or while breastfeeding, which can last years, not on the eve of major feast days. Add it all up, and there are approximately 180 to 200 days a year when sex is forbidden. That's more than half the year when marital sex is technically sinful. The church justifies this by saying that holy days require spiritual purity, and sex, even marital sex, makes you spiritually unclean. You can't approach the Eucharist, you can't attend Mass properly if you've had sex the night before. So married couples are expected to time their sexual activity around the church calendar, abstaining during all these prohibited periods. Do people follow these rules? Some try. The very devout genuinely abstain. But most people ignore them, at least partially, and then confess to their priest afterward. How? Missionary position only. The church has determined that this is the natural position, the one that best reflects divine order. Man on top, woman beneath, face to face. Any other position is considered unnatural, sinful, and bestial. Variations are evidence of lust, which is a deadly sin. Why is the church so specific about positions? Because they believe sex should be purely functional. The missionary position is seen as the most likely to result in conception, and the least likely to be done purely for pleasure. Positions where the woman is on top, absolutely forbidden. That reverses the natural order, placing the woman in a position of power over the man. From behind, forbidden. That's how animals copulate, and humans should be above such base behaviour. Side by side, also problematic, though slightly less sinful than other variations. The Church literally has a hierarchy of sexual positions ranked by how sinful they are. And priests ask about this in confession. You're expected to confess not just that you had sex, but how you had sex. And if you did it in any position other than missionary, you're assigned extra penance. Oral sex? Absolutely not. That's sodomy, a term that covers any non-procreative sexual act. Oral sex can't result in pregnancy, so it's purely lustful, making it a serious sin. Punishment for oral sex, even between married couples, can be severe. Years of penance, public shaming, even excommunication in extreme cases. The Church literally has a hierarchy of sexual positions ranked by how sinful they are. And priests ask about this in confession. You're expected to confess not just that you had sex, but how you had sex. And if you did it in any position other than missionary, you're assigned extra penance. Oral sex? Absolutely not. That's sodomy, a term that covers any non-procreative sexual act. Oral sex can't result in pregnancy, so it's purely lustful, making it a serious sin. Punishment for oral sex, even between married couples, can be severe. Years of penance, public shaming, even excommunication in extreme cases. Anal sex? Also sodomy. Also severely punished. The Church considers it one of the worst sexual sins because it's completely divorced from procreation. Manual stimulation? Sinful. Foreplay that focuses on pleasure rather than preparation for procreation? Sinful. The Church wants marital sex to be quick, efficient, and focused solely on conception. Anything that suggests you're enjoying it is evidence of sin. This creates an impossible situation. Married couples are supposed to have sex, to produce children, but they're also supposed to not enjoy it, to approach it with spiritual dread. And women especially are caught in this trap. If a woman experiences sexual pleasure, that's evidence of her sinful nature. Good women are supposed to endure sex passively, submitting to their husband's needs without experiencing desire themselves. Female orgasm is particularly suspicious. Some theologians argue that women don't need to experience pleasure for conception to occur, so any pleasure a woman feels is unnecessary and therefore sinful. But other medical texts, influenced by ancient Greek medicine, claim that women need to experience pleasure, or at least some form of physical response, for conception to happen. So, medieval people are confused. Is female pleasure necessary or sinful? The Church says sinful, medicine says necessary, and couples navigate this contradiction as best they can. How often? Not too much. Excessive sexual desire, even for your spouse, is sinful. The Church doesn't provide a specific number, but frequent sex suggests lust. Some theologians suggest married couples should have sex only when trying to conceive. Once the wife is pregnant, sex should stop until after the child is born and weaned. That could mean years of abstinence. Other, more moderate voices suggest that sex is acceptable to satisfy the marital debt, a concept where spouses owe each other sexual access. If your spouse desires sex, you're obligated to provide it, to prevent them from sinning through adultery or masturbation. But even this is framed as duty, not pleasure. And if you engage in sex too frequently, you're supposed to confess it. Priests ask, how often do you have relations with your spouse? If the answer suggests lust, you're assigned penance. The Church also has opinions about fertility and infertility. If a couple can't conceive, it might be God's punishment for sexual sin. Maybe you had sex on a forbidden day. Maybe you enjoyed it too much. Maybe you used a sinful position. So, infertile couples are advised to examine their sexual practices, confess their sins, and try to have sex correctly. And then there are the penitentials, guidebooks for priests listing sexual sins and their corresponding punishments. These books are remarkably detailed. They cover every conceivable sexual act and assign specific penances. For example, sex on Sunday, 10 days of fasting on bread and water. Sex during menstruation, 40 days of penance. Sex while pregnant, 3 years of penance. Yes, years. Sex in any position other than missionary, 40 days to 3 years depending on frequency. Masturbation, 20 days to 1 year, depending on age and whether you're married. Oral sex, 3 to 7 years of penance. Use of contraception, 10 years of penance. Contraception is considered murder because it prevents a soul from being born. These penances are serious. They involve fasting, prayer, abstaining from communion, sometimes public confession. And yes, people are expected to confess these sins. The church requires confession at least once a year, and priests are trained to ask probing questions about sexual behaviour. Confession is supposed to be private, but in small communities, priests know everyone. They know who's married to whom, who's having trouble conceiving, who's been seen entering whose house at odd hours. So, confession becomes a form of surveillance. The church monitors sexual behaviour through the confessional, using guilt and fear of damnation to control people's most intimate acts. And nocturnal emissions. Men can't control those, but they're still sinful. If you have a wet dream, you're supposed to confess. The penance is lighter than for deliberate sexual sin, but you still need absolution. Some theologians debate whether nocturnal emissions that occur without lustful dreams are sinful. If you wake up having ejaculated but don't remember any sexual dream, is that a sin? Most conclude it's not, but you should still pray for purity just in case. Contraception is absolutely forbidden. Any attempt to prevent pregnancy is considered a grave sin, tantamount to murder because you're preventing a soul from being created. Medieval people do have contraceptive methods, herbal preparations, barrier methods, withdrawal, but using them is a mortal sin. Some couples use them anyway, especially if they already have many children and can't afford more. But they're risking eternal damnation. And if the church finds out through confession or accusation, the punishment is severe. Abortion is also forbidden and equated with murder. Any woman who terminates a pregnancy faces excommunication, and if caught by secular authorities, possibly execution. But abortions happen. Desperate women use herbal abortifacients, pennyroyal, tansy, rue. These are dangerous, often ineffective and sometimes deadly to the woman. But poverty, illegitimacy and social ruin drive women to take the risk. The church's obsession with controlling sexuality creates a culture of shame, guilt, and hypocrisy. Everyone is sinning sexually. Everyone. Because the rules are impossible to follow. Married couples have sex when they're not supposed to. They enjoy it, which they're not supposed to. They use forbidden positions. They practice withdrawal to avoid pregnancy. And then they confess, receive penance, and sin again. It's an endless cycle of transgression and absolution. And the church benefits. The confessional gives them power over people's most private moments. Penance reinforces their authority. And the constant reminder of sexual sin keeps people spiritually dependent on the church's forgiveness. So, medieval sex is less about pleasure, connection, or even procreation, and more about control. The church wants to regulate every aspect of human sexuality, from frequency to position to intent. They want to ensure that even in the marriage bed, people remember they're sinners in need of salvation. It's oppressive, invasive, and deeply damaging to healthy sexuality. But it's the reality of medieval life, and people navigate it as best they can, sinning, confessing, and trying not to think too hard about the contradictions. Chapter 7. Adultery, Scandal, and the Price of Betrayal. So, you're married, you're miserable, and you've fallen for someone else. Maybe it's that charming blacksmith, maybe it's the Lord's visiting cousin, maybe it's just anyone who isn't your spouse. What do? If you're smart, nothing. Because adultery in the Middle Ages isn't just a sin, it's a crime, a scandal, and a potential death sentence. Let's start with the legal consequences. Adultery is illegal under both church and secular law. If you're caught, you can be fined, publicly shamed, imprisoned, or in extreme cases, executed. For women, the consequences are harsher. A wife's adultery is seen as worse than a husband's because it threatens the legitimacy of children. If a woman has an affair, any child she bears might not be her husband's. This is a disaster for inheritance, family lineage, and property rights. So, adulterous women are punished severely. They might be whipped publicly, forced to wear marks of shame, or even mutilated. In some regions, an unfaithful wife can have her nose or ears cut off. Men face consequences too, but they're generally lighter. A husband's adultery is bad, but it doesn't threaten the family line in the same way. So, he might be fined, publicly shamed, or forced to do penance, but he's less likely to face physical punishment. And if the adultery involves a married woman and a single man, the man is still guilty, and he'll be punished. But if it's a married man and a single woman, well, that's prostitution or fornication, not adultery, and the penalties are different. The Church, meanwhile, treats all extramarital sex as mortal sin. If you commit adultery, you're risking eternal damnation. You must confess, do penance, and seek absolution. Otherwise, you're going to hell. But here's the thing. People commit adultery anyway, constantly. Court records are full of adultery cases. Church courts are constantly prosecuting fornicators and adulterers. It's one of the most common crimes, right up there with theft and assault. Why? Because medieval marriages are loveless, people are human, and desire doesn't care about law or theology. So affairs happen. Secret meetings in barns, in forests, in back rooms. Liaisons during pilgrimages, at markets, at festivals. Anywhere people can find privacy, which is rare, but not impossible. And if you're wealthy, you have more options. Nobles can afford private chambers, hunting trips, and extended visits to other estates. They can conduct affairs with more discretion. But even among the rich, adultery is risky. Because if you're caught, the scandal is enormous. Reputation is everything. A noble family's honour depends on the purity of their women and the fidelity of their men. An adultery scandal can destroy alliances, ruin marriages, and end careers. Take, for example, Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine. Married first to King Louis VII of France, then to King Henry II of England. She was rumoured to have had affairs. Whether true or not, the rumours damaged her reputation and were used against her politically. Or consider the many tales of courtly love that turned into actual adultery. Knights who worshipped married noblewomen from afar sometimes crossed the line, and when they did, the consequences were brutal. Exile, loss of lands, even execution. Because while courtly love was tolerated as fantasy, actual adultery was not. And then there are the crimes of passion. Jealous spouses murdering unfaithful partners, cuckolded husbands killing their wives' lovers. These cases fill medieval court records. The legal system often sympathises with wronged husbands. In some regions, a man who catches his wife in the act of adultery is allowed to kill her and her lover without facing murder charges. It's considered justifiable homicide. Women, of course, have no such protection. If your husband is unfaithful, you're expected to endure it. Killing him or his mistress, that's murder, and you'll hang for it. Chapter 8. Widowhood and the rare gift of freedom. Let's say your spouse dies. Maybe from disease, maybe from childbirth, maybe from an infected tooth. Whatever the cause, you're now a widow or widower. And here's the strange part. This might be the best thing that ever happened to you. Because widowhood, especially for women, offers a rare taste of freedom in the Middle Ages. As a married woman, you're legally under your husband's authority. You can't own property. You can't make contracts. You're essentially a dependent. But when your husband dies, things change. You inherit. Maybe not everything. The bulk of the estate might go to your sons, but you get a portion. Typically, a widow is entitled to 1/3 of her late husband's estate, called a dower. This is yours to control, and control is the key word. As a widow, you're no longer under a man's legal authority. You can own property, you can run a business, you can make decisions. This is incredibly rare for medieval women. Widowhood is one of the few times when a woman has legal and economic independence. So, some widows thrive. They take over their late husband's businesses, they manage estates, they become landlords, merchants, even moneylenders. Records show widows running breweries, textile operations and farms, and they don't have to remarry. Yes, there's pressure, especially if they're young. Families want to secure alliances. The crown might want to control valuable estates. But legally, a widow can refuse, and many do. Because why would you give up your newfound freedom to become someone else's dependent again? Of course, widowhood has downsides. If you're poor, losing your husband means losing your primary income. You might struggle to survive. You might be forced to rely on charity or family support. And if you have young children, you're now a single parent in a world with no safety net. You have to feed them, clothe them, and prepare them for adulthood, all on your own. But if you have resources, widowhood can be liberating. Some widows even become powerful political figures. Take Matilda of Tuscany, a widow who controlled vast territories in Italy and became a key ally of the Pope. Or Eleanor of Aquitaine, who, after being widowed from Henry II, wielded significant influence over her sons who became kings. Widows could also enter religious life. Convents welcomed wealthy widows who brought dowries and resources. In return, they got spiritual fulfillment, community, and continued independence from male authority. For men, widowhood is different. As a widower, you're expected to remarry quickly, especially if you have young children who need a mother, and since men control property and have economic power, remarriage is easy. But some men choose to remain widowers, especially if they're older or if their children are grown. They might focus on their work, their estates, or their spiritual life. And like widows, some widowers find freedom in their situation. No longer tied to marital obligations, they can pursue interests, travel, or dedicate themselves to public service. But the social expectations are different. A widower who doesn't remarry might be seen as odd, especially if he's young and wealthy. People will question why he's not seeking a new wife. Widows, on the other hand, are often celebrated for remaining unmarried, especially if they dedicate themselves to piety and charity. So, widowhood is a paradox. It's a tragedy, the loss of a spouse, but it's also an opportunity. For the first time, you might have control over your own life, and in the Middle Ages that's a rare and precious gift. Chapter 9. Bastards, Illegitimacy, and the Children. No one wants. Let's talk about what happens when medieval romance goes wrong. Not just wrong, but catastrophically, life-ruiningly wrong. Let's talk about illegitimate children. In the Middle Ages, if you have a child outside of marriage, that child is a bastard. And being a bastard is a legal, social, and spiritual disaster. First, the legal problems. Illegitimate children have almost no rights. They can't inherit property. They can't claim their father's title. They can't even use their father's surname in many cases. If you're a nobleman with an illegitimate son, that son is not your heir. He's a social embarrassment. You might acknowledge him, you might even raise him, but he'll never inherit your lands or your title. Some bastards are given minor positions, maybe a small estate, a church position, or a military role, but they're always second class, always reminded that they're not legitimate. For women who bear illegitimate children, the consequences are even worse. You're a social pariah. Your reputation is destroyed. You're branded as a whore, regardless of the circumstances. Maybe you were raped. Maybe you were coerced. Maybe you were in love and thought you'd marry. Doesn't matter. You had a child out of wedlock and you're ruined. Your family might disown you. The church will shame you. And good luck finding a husband. No respectable man wants a woman with an illegitimate child. So, what do women do? Some abandon their babies. Infanticide, while illegal and condemned by the church, happens. Desperate women leave newborns on church steps, in forests or in rivers, hoping someone will take them in or that they'll die quickly. Others try to hide the pregnancy. They wear loose clothing, avoid public spaces, and when the time comes, give birth in secret. Then they either keep the child hidden or find someone to take it. Foundling hospitals exist in some cities, institutions run by the church to care for abandoned babies. But these places are overcrowded, underfunded, and have horrific mortality rates. Most babies left at foundling hospitals die within months, and if you keep the child, you raise them as best you can, but they'll always be marked. They'll be called bastard as an insult. They'll face discrimination in employment, education, and social opportunities. For men who father illegitimate children, the consequences depend on their social status. If you're a peasant, you might be forced to marry the woman, especially if the pregnancy becomes public. The community and the church will pressure you to make it right. If you're wealthy, you can often escape responsibility. You might deny paternity. You might pay the woman off. You might send her away. Some noblemen openly acknowledge their bastards. Kings and lords often have multiple illegitimate children from affairs or mistresses. These children are raised at court, given minor titles, and used as political pawns, but they're always lesser, always reminded that they're not legitimate heirs. The church's position on illegitimacy is harsh. Bastards are seen as products of sin. They're tainted by the circumstances of their conception. Some theologians even argue that illegitimate children are more prone to sin, because they're born from lust. This stigma is so strong that illegitimate children are often barred from holding church positions. If you're a bastard, you can't become a priest, a bishop, or a monk without special dispensation. And marriage, difficult. Many families refuse to let their children marry bastards. The stigma is too great. So, illegitimate children grow up in a world that constantly reminds them they're unwanted, unloved, and unworthy. Some overcome it. They work hard, prove themselves, and carve out decent lives, but they're always fighting against their birth. And this creates a bizarre situation where children are punished for circumstances they had no control over. They didn't choose to be born illegitimate, but society blames them anyway. It's cruel, it's unjust, and it's completely normal in the Middle Ages, because legitimacy isn't just about legal status, it's about family, inheritance, and social order. Bastards threaten all of that. They're living proof of sin, disorder, and broken rules. So they're marginalized, stigmatized, and forgotten. Chapter 10. The Marriage Market, Dowries, and the Price of a Wife. Time to talk about money. Because medieval marriage isn't just about love, duty, or producing heirs, it's also about cash, land, livestock, assets. Welcome to the marriage market, where brides and grooms are bought and sold like commodities. Let's start with the dowry. This is the money or property a bride's family gives to the groom or his family at marriage. Think of it as a payment, compensation for taking their daughter off their hands. The size of the dowry depends on the family's wealth and the bride's desirability. A beautiful, well-connected, fertile young woman from a rich family. Her dowry will be massive. Land, gold, livestock, maybe even political alliances. A plain, older, or poor woman, her dowry will be modest. Maybe some household goods, a small sum of money, or just the promise of her labour. For wealthy families, the dowry is a strategic tool. They use it to secure advantageous marriages, build alliances, and elevate their social status. A nobleman might marry his daughter to a wealthy merchant, accepting a smaller noble title in exchange for an enormous cash dowry. The merchant's family gains prestige, the noble gains wealth. Everyone wins, except possibly the bride and groom who didn't choose each other. The negotiation process is complex. Both families bring representatives, sometimes professional negotiators, sometimes trusted advisors. They meet, often multiple times, to hammer out details. The bride's family opens with an offer. We'll provide 3 manors, 200 acres of farmland, 50 gold coins, and a dozen breeding cattle. The groom's family counters, not enough. Your manors are poorly managed. The farmland is rocky. We want 4 manors, 300 acres, and 100 gold coins. They argue over every detail, the quality of land, the condition of buildings, the actual value of livestock, whether those 50 gold coins are full weight or clipped. These negotiations can take months. Families walk away, they make threats, they bring in third parties to mediate, and the bride and groom, they wait, their futures being decided like commodities at market. For poor families, the dowry is a crushing burden. Scraping together enough money or goods to marry off a daughter can be financially devastating. Some families go into debt. Some delay their daughters' marriages for years, saving up. A peasant family might need to provide a cow, some chickens, basic household goods, pots, bedding, tools, maybe a small amount of saved grain or a few pieces of silver. This doesn't sound like much, but for a family living on subsistence farming, it represents years of savings. They have to forgo other purchases, scrimp on food, work extra to accumulate these resources, and if a family has multiple daughters, they might not be able to afford dowries for all of them. The eldest daughter gets the best dowry. She marries first, ideally well. The younger daughters get progressively smaller dowries, and their marriage prospects decline accordingly. The youngest daughter might not marry at all. Her dowry goes to the eldest sister to make a better match. She becomes the family's unmarried daughter, the one who stays home to care for aging parents. This isn't cruelty, it's mathematics. The family can't afford to marry off everyone, so they prioritize. And if a family can't afford any dowry, their daughter might never marry. She'll become a burden, dependent on her family or forced to work as a servant. Some women enter convents instead. Convents require a dowry too, but it's often smaller than a marriage dowry. So for families with multiple daughters and limited resources, sending 1 or 2 to a convent is a practical solution. The daughter becomes a nun, not out of religious calling, but because her family can't afford to marry her off. It's pragmatic and it solves a problem. The daughter is housed, fed and cared for, the family is relieved of the burden. Everyone accepts this arrangement. But let's say you're a groom, you receive the dowry. What happens to it? Legally, it becomes yours to manage. The bride's family hands over the assets and you control them. The The bride has no legal claim to her own dowry once she's married. In theory, the dowry is supposed to support the wife if her husband dies or if the marriage is annulled. It's her financial security. But in practice, husbands often use the dowry for their own purposes, and recovering it can be difficult. If the husband dies, the widow is entitled to her dowry back, plus a portion of her husband's estate called the dower. But actually getting these assets requires legal action, family cooperation, and sometimes years of fighting. Some widows never recover their dowries. The husband's family claims the assets are spent, lost, or tied up in debts. The widow has limited legal recourse, especially if she has no powerful family backing her. Now, let's talk about the bride price, a different but related concept. In some cultures and earlier periods, the groom's family pays the bride's family. This is less common in medieval Europe, but still exists in some regions and among certain groups. The logic is reversed. Instead of compensating the groom for taking the bride's family is compensated for losing a valuable member. In these systems, women are explicitly valued for their labour, their reproductive capacity, their contribution to the household. The bride price reflects her worth. But whether it's a dowry or a bride price, the principle is the same. Marriage is a financial transaction, and this creates some ugly dynamics. Women are valued based on their economic potential. Can you bring a large dowry? Are you fertile? Can you manage a household? These are the questions that determine your worth. Beauty matters, but it's secondary to economics. A plain woman with a huge dowry is more valuable than a beautiful woman with nothing, and men are valued based on their ability to provide. Do you have land? Can you support a family? Are you likely to die young and leave your wife a wealthy widow? These are the calculations families make when arranging marriages. It's mercenary, it's dehumanizing, but it's how the system works. For nobles, the marriage market is especially complex. Marriages are negotiated like business deals, with lawyers, contracts, and detailed terms. Every aspect is planned. The dowry, the dower, the portion of the husband's estate the wife will inherit, the living arrangements, even the division of property in case of annulment. Contracts run to dozens of pages. They specify what happens if the bride or groom dies before the wedding, what happens if the marriage produces no heirs, what happens if one party commits adultery, how disputes will be resolved, which laws apply if the couple lives in different jurisdictions. It's exhaustive, anticipating every possible problem. And because so much is at stake, marriages are often delayed or cancelled over financial disputes. Families argue over the terms. They demand more land, more money, more concessions. Some engagements drag on for years because the families can't agree on the dowry. One family might claim the other is misrepresenting their assets. You said the manor produces 100 bushels of grain a year, but our investigation shows it's barely 60. Accusations of fraud are common. Families hire assessors to evaluate properties, inspect livestock, audit accounts. They don't trust each other, and with good reason. Because everyone is trying to get the best deal possible, which means everyone is exaggerating their assets and downplaying their liabilities. And if a marriage is annulled or the husband dies, the dowry becomes a legal battleground. The wife's family wants it back. The husband's family wants to keep it. Lawsuits ensue. These cases can drag on for years in ecclesiastical courts. Witnesses testify about what was promised versus what was delivered. Documents are produced, challenged, disputed. The widow, meanwhile, is often left in limbo. She can't remarry until the dowry is settled. She can't access her late husband's estate. She's stuck. For peasants, the process is simpler, but still mercenary. Families negotiate what each side will contribute. Maybe the bride brings a cow, some chickens, and a set of cooking pots. The groom brings land or the promise of labour. It's not romantic, but it's practical. Marriage is an economic partnership, and both sides need to contribute. The negotiations happen informally, often over several meetings. The families sit down, maybe after church or during a village gathering. They discuss openly, what can you provide? What do you need? They haggle, but in a friendlier way than nobles. These are neighbours, people who'll continue living near each other. They can't afford to create lasting animosity, so they compromise. They find a middle ground. They shake hands, and the marriage proceeds. But even here there's calculation. Each family is trying to secure the best outcome for their child without giving away too much. A clever family might hold back some resources, promising more than they deliver. The bride's family says she'll bring 10 chickens, but only delivers 8. hoping the groom's family won't make a fuss after the wedding. Or the groom's family promises a piece of land, but it turns out to be smaller or less fertile than advertised. These deceptions cause friction. Young marriages start with resentment because the in-laws feel cheated. But here's the cruel irony. While marriage is presented as a partnership, it's actually a hierarchy. The husband controls the assets. The wife is legally dependent. So the dowry that was supposed to protect the wife often ends up enriching the husband, and women have no recourse. Once married, they're stuck. The law is clear. A married woman is a feme covert, legally covered by her husband. She can't own property independently. She can't sign contracts. She can't bring lawsuits. Her dowry, her inheritance, even her earnings become her husband's. If he's a good man, he'll manage the assets wisely and provide for her. If he's not, he can squander everything, and she has no legal power to stop him. So the marriage market isn't just about money, it's about power. And in the Middle Ages, women are almost always on the losing side. There are exceptions. Widows, as we discussed, gain some autonomy. Women with powerful families can leverage their connections to protect their interests. But for most women, marriage means economic dependency and legal invisibility. And the dowry, which was supposed to be her security, becomes just another tool of her subordination. Meanwhile, men are juggling their own pressures. They need to provide. They need to protect their family's assets. They need to ensure their children inherit. A man who marries a woman with a large dowry gains resources, but he also gains responsibility. That dowry needs to be managed, invested, protected. If he loses it through poor decisions, his family and his in-laws will blame him. So, men are under pressure too, though from a position of power, and for everyone, marriage is a gamble. You're betting that the assets promised will actually materialize. You're betting that your spouse will be healthy, fertile, and cooperative. You're betting that you can build a life together. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the dowry is fair, the couple is compatible, and they build a successful partnership. But often it doesn't. The dowry is smaller than promised. The spouse is difficult. The assets are mismanaged, and you're stuck. Because divorce doesn't exist. So the marriage market is ruthless. It treats people as commodities, values them based on economic potential, and creates relationships based on transaction rather than affection. It's ugly, but it's medieval reality. And if you're looking for romance in this system, you're looking in the wrong place. Chapter 11. Love Potions, Magic, and Desperate Measures. All right, so you've tried everything. You've followed the rules. You've let your parents choose your spouse. You've endured a loveless marriage, but what if you want to take matters into your own hands? What if you want to make someone fall in love with you, or fall out of love with someone else? Welcome to the world of medieval love magic, where desperate people turn to herbs, spells, and very questionable remedies. Let's be clear, the Church condemns all forms of magic. Sorcery is a sin, a crime, and grounds for excommunication or execution. But that doesn't stop people from trying. Love potions are especially popular. These are concoctions, usually herbal mixtures, believed to cause someone to fall in love with you. The recipes vary, but common ingredients include mandrake root, because of its humanoid shape, associated with fertility and desire; vervain, believed to inspire passion; rose petals, for love and beauty; animal parts, especially from creatures associated with fertility like rabbits or doves; bodily fluids, yes, including menstrual blood, semen, or sweat. You mix these ingredients, often under specific astrological conditions, and then slip the potion into your target's food or drink. Does it work? No. But people believe it does, and belief is powerful, and if someone finds out you've used a love potion, you're in serious trouble. This is witchcraft. You could be tried, tortured, and executed. But love potions aren't the only form of romantic magic. There are also charms, rituals, and incantations. For example, young women might perform rituals on St. Agnes's Eve, believing they'll see visions of their future husbands in their dreams. They fast, say specific prayers, and sleep with certain herbs under their pillows. Or consider the love knot, a charm made by tying specific knots in string or ribbon while reciting spells. The knot is supposed to bind the lover's affection to you. There are also curses. If you want to break up a couple or punish an unfaithful lover, you might perform a ritual to curse them. Maybe you, Create a poppet, a doll representing the person, and stick it with pins, or you bury objects associated with them while chanting curses. Again, the church forbids all of this, but people do it anyway, and it's not just peasants. Nobles too dabble in love magic. Historical records show accusations of witchcraft against noblewomen who allegedly used potions to seduce kings or eliminate rivals. Take Anne Boleyn, second wife of Henry VIII. She was accused of using witchcraft to seduce the king, and then to cause his impotence with other women. The accusations were almost certainly false, politically motivated, but they reflect the belief that women, especially, used magic to manipulate love and desire. But here's the thing. Love magic is dangerous not just because it's illegal, but because it reveals desperation. If you're resorting to potions and spells, it means you have no power in your romantic life. You can't choose your spouse, you can't leave your marriage, you can't control your desires, so you turn to magic. It's a way to reclaim agency, even if it's just an illusion. And the church knows this. That's why they condemn it so harshly, because love magic challenges their authority. It suggests that people, especially women, can manipulate fate, bypass social norms, and take control of their own lives, and that's unacceptable. So, love magic persists in the shadows, whispered about, practiced in secret, and punished brutally when discovered. It's a testament to how powerless people feel in their romantic lives, and how far they'll go to find even a shred of control. Chapter 12. Gay and lesbian relationships in a heteronormative world. Let's talk about something the Middle Ages tried very hard to pretend didn't exist: same-sex desire. Because despite the church's insistence that all sex outside of heterosexual marriage is sinful, people are still people, and some people are attracted to the same sex. The church's position is clear: sodomy, a catch-all term for non-procreative sex, including same-sex acts, is a mortal sin. It's condemned in the strongest terms. It's considered unnatural, against God's will, and punishable by death. In many regions, sodomy laws are harsh. If you're caught engaging in same-sex acts, you can be burned at stake, hanged, or castrated. But here's the thing: enforcement is inconsistent. Accusations are rare. Prosecutions are even rarer, because same-sex relationships, especially among men, often fly under the radar. They're dismissed as close friendships, mentorships, or brotherly bonds. Medieval culture has a concept of intense male friendship that borders on romantic. Knights swear oaths of loyalty to each other. Monks live in close quarters, sharing beds and forming deep emotional bonds. Scholars correspond in passionate, affectionate language, and as long as no one explicitly accuses them of sexual acts, these relationships are tolerated. But if sex is discovered or even rumoured, the consequences are brutal. Take, for example, the case of John Rickner, a male sex worker in 14th century London who dressed as a woman and had sex with both men and women. When arrested, Rickner's testimony reveals a surprisingly complex underground world of same-sex encounters. But Rickner's case is unusual because it was recorded. Most such cases are not. For women, same-sex relationships are even more invisible. The church and legal system rarely acknowledge female same-sex desire. It's as if it doesn't exist. Why? Because medieval culture can't imagine sex without a penis. Female same-sex acts don't fit the definition of sex as the church understands it. So, lesbian relationships are dismissed as intense friendships, or, if sexual, considered less serious than male sodomy. Some women exploit this invisibility. They form lifelong partnerships, live together, share beds, and function as married couples without anyone questioning it. There are historical records of romantic friendships between women, relationships that were openly affectionate, emotionally intimate, and possibly sexual. But as long as they didn't publicly claim to be sexual, they were left alone. Convents, in particular, are spaces where women form intense emotional and possibly physical bonds. Nuns live together, sleep in communal dormitories, and develop deep attachments. Some of these relationships are platonic, others are not. But the church, as long as there's no public scandal, turns a blind eye. And then there are the cross-dressers, people who live as the opposite gender, sometimes for years, without being discovered. Joan of Arc, for example, dressed as a man and led armies. She was eventually burned at the stake, but one of the charges against her was cross-dressing, which was considered a sign of deviance and possibly sodomy. There are also records of women who lived as men, married women, and were only discovered after death. Their motivations varied. Some wanted economic opportunities only available to men. Others may have been transgender in the modern sense. Still, others may have been lesbians seeking to live with female partners without suspicion. For men, cross-dressing is even more scandalous. It's seen as a rejection of masculinity, a humiliation. Men who dress as women are accused of sodomy, witchcraft, and moral corruption. So same-sex desire in the Middle Ages exists, but it's hidden, dangerous, and constantly policed. People find ways to love, to connect, to have relationships, but they do so in the shadows, always aware that discovery could mean death. It's a reminder that human desire is diverse, resilient, and impossible to fully suppress, even in the most repressive societies. Chapter 14. Beauty, Bodies, and the Medieval Standards You Couldn't Meet. Let's talk about physical attraction. Because even in an era of arranged marriages and economic partnerships, looks matter. Maybe not as much as dowry size, but they matter. Medieval beauty standards are specific, bizarre, and completely unattainable for most people. For women, the ideal is pale skin, blonde hair, small breasts, wide hips, a high forehead, rosy cheeks, red lips, and slender fingers. Let's break this down. Pale skin is essential. Why? Because tan skin means you work outdoors, which means you're poor. Peasant women labouring in fields get sun-weathered, darkened skin. Noble women, who stay indoors, remain pale. So, pale skin becomes a class marker, and women go to extraordinary lengths to achieve it. They use cosmetics made from white lead, which is literally poisonous. Prolonged use causes skin damage, hair loss, and eventually death. But the results are immediate: smooth, white skin. They also avoid the sun religiously: wide-brimmed hats, veils, staying indoors during peak daylight hours. Tanning is social suicide. Blonde hair is prized, especially in Northern Europe. It's associated with youth, purity, and angelic beauty. Brunettes are common, so blonde stands out. Women lighten their hair using lye, saffron, and other harsh chemicals. They sit in the sun with their hair soaked in these mixtures, hoping to achieve a golden colour. The process damages hair, makes it brittle, sometimes causes it to fall out. But a blonde woman commands a better marriage market, so the risk is worth it. The high forehead is particularly weird. Medieval beauty standards favour a forehead that extends far above the natural hairline. Why? No one knows. But it's considered attractive. So, women pluck their hairlines back, repeatedly, painfully. They pluck eyebrows entirely, creating a smooth, high forehead that makes them look perpetually surprised. It's uncomfortable, it's time-consuming, and it looks bizarre to modernise. But in the Middle Ages, it's beautiful. Small breasts are preferred, especially among nobility. Large breasts are associated with peasants, wet nurses, and fertility in a base animal way. The aristocratic ideal is slender, almost boyish. Women bind their chests to minimise breast size. They wear tightly laced bodices that flatten and constrain. Comfort is irrelevant. Beauty requires sacrifice. But wide hips are essential, because hips signal fertility. Childbearing hips mean you can produce heirs, which is the entire point of marriage. So the ideal woman is flat-chested but wide-hipped, a combination that's naturally rare. For men, the ideal is tall, broad-shouldered, strong, with a full beard or clean-shaven depending on the era, and well-proportioned features. But unlike women, men's attractiveness is tied more to their status than their physical appearance. A powerful, wealthy man is considered attractive almost by definition, regardless of his actual looks. That said, certain physical traits help. Height is valuable. Tall men are seen as more capable warriors, more imposing, more commanding. Short men face prejudice. Strength is essential. Medieval life requires physical labour, even for nobles who train constantly for combat. A weak man is considered defective. Beards go in and out of fashion. In some periods, beards signal maturity and wisdom. In others, clean-shaven faces are preferred, associated with youth and the classical Roman ideal. Men don't use cosmetics the way women do, but they do groom carefully. Hair is trimmed, beards are shaped, clothing is chosen to emphasize broad shoulders and strong legs. And for both sexes, teeth are a nightmare. Medieval dental hygiene is terrible. Most people have cavities, missing teeth, gum disease. The wealthy can afford some dental care, tooth pulling, rudimentary cleaning. But it's painful and often ineffective. Bad breath is universal. People chew herbs to mask it. Mint, fennel, cloves. But it only helps so much, and missing teeth? And that's just life. By age 30, most people have lost several teeth. By 50, you might be nearly toothless. This affects attractiveness enormously. A young person with all their teeth is notably beautiful. An older person with a full smile is rare and valued. Then there's body odour. Remember, bathing is infrequent. People smell. Everyone smells. The wealthy use perfumes, scented oils, pomanders filled with spices. But underneath, they still smell of sweat, dirt, and unwashed clothes. So when assessing a potential spouse, you're evaluating someone who probably smells bad, has questionable teeth, and is covered in layers of clothing that hide their actual body. Physical attraction is complicated. For arranged marriages, the bride and groom might meet only briefly before the wedding. They size each other up quickly. Is she healthy looking? Does he seem strong? Are there visible deformities or signs of disease? Because disease is a deal breaker. Leprosy, plague scars, visible. Infections, these are grounds for breaking an engagement. Families sometimes hide medical conditions. They paint over skin lesions with cosmetics. They dress people carefully to conceal deformities. They coach them to stand, walk, and speak in ways that minimize flaws. It's medieval catfishing. And when the deception is discovered after marriage, too bad. You're stuck. There's also the matter of virginity and its supposed physical signs. Medieval people believe they can determine if a woman is a virgin by physical examination. They're wrong, but they believe it. Before marriage, especially among nobility, a bride might be examined by midwives or female relatives to confirm her virginity. This is humiliating, invasive, and based on complete pseudoscience. They look for an intact hymen, which they believe is proof of virginity. But hymens can break from non-sexual activity, or be naturally absent, or remain intact even after sex. So women are judged based on unreliable, based, physical evidence, and if found lacking, the marriage can be called off or annulled. This creates enormous pressure. Women who aren't virgins fake it. They use blood capsules or cut themselves slightly to produce blood on the wedding night. They lie, they deceive, because the alternative is social ruin. Men face less scrutiny, but they are expected to perform sexually. Impotence is shameful and grounds for annulment. Some men use folk remedies, herbs, potions, rituals, to ensure performance. And if they fail on the wedding night, it's a disaster. Witnesses are listening, the wife's family will know, the marriage could be invalidated, so both sexes face pressure to perform physically, to meet impossible standards, to prove their worth through their bodies, and beauty, such as it is, fades fast. Life is hard. By 30, most people look worn, aged beyond their years. Women who've borne multiple children have bodies marked by pregnancy and childbirth. Men who've laboured or fought in wars carry scars, injuries, chronic pain. The beautiful young bride becomes a tired mother. The strong young groom becomes a scarred labourer. But they're married for life, so they adapt. Attraction becomes less about physical appearance and more about partnership, about survival, about the small kindnesses that make daily life bearable. Because in the Middle Ages, beauty is a bonus. What matters is fertility, health, and the ability to work. Everything else is decoration. Chapter 15. The Wedding Feast. Ritual humiliation and getting drunk on ale. Let's get back to your wedding day. The ceremony is done. You're officially married. Now comes the part everyone's actually excited about, the feast. Because medieval people love an excuse to eat, drink, and make inappropriate jokes at your expense. If your family has money, the wedding feast is the social event of the year. For peasants, it might be the only time in your life when you eat meat and white, bread in the same meal. Preparation starts days in advance. Animals are slaughtered, pigs, chickens, maybe a cow if you're wealthy. Bread is baked in enormous quantities. Ale is brewed, gallons and gallons of it. For nobles, the feast is elaborate. Multiple courses, dozens of dishes, exotic spices imported from the east. There's roasted meat, swan, peacock, venison. There are pies filled with beef, lamb or eel. There are puddings, custards, fruits preserved in honey. The food isn't just sustenance, it's a status display. The more elaborate the meal, the more important your family appears. Guests are seated according to rank. The most important people sit at the high table with the bride and groom. Everyone else is arranged by social status, creating a physical hierarchy in the room. And the hall is decorated. Flowers if it's summer, greenery, banners displaying family symbols, musicians play throughout the meal, lutes, pipes, drums. For peasants, the feast is simpler, but no, less important. Long tables are set up outside or in a barn. Everyone from the village attends. They bring food to contribute. Bread, cheese, vegetables, whatever they can spare. There's roasted pork if the family saved up for it. There's fresh bread, a luxury for people who usually eat coarse brown bread. There's ale, brewed specially for the occasion, weaker than what the nobles drink but plentiful. The village priest blesses the meal, then everyone eats and drinks. Medieval weddings involve staggering amounts of alcohol. Ale for the commoners, wine for the wealthy. People get drunk, very drunk. It's expected. A wedding where people stay sober is considered a failure. As the feast progresses, the atmosphere shifts from formal to chaotic. People loosen up, they tell bawdy jokes, they sing drinking songs, they make increasingly crude comments about the wedding night. This is part of the tradition, mocking the bride and groom, making sexual innuendos, teasing them about what's to come. It's all considered good fun. The bride and groom sit there, blushing or laughing awkwardly, while their drunk uncles shout about marital duties and guests make graphic gestures. It's uncomfortable. But it's how medieval people celebrate. And then come the toasts. Everyone wants to toast the couple. They wish for fertility. May you have many sons. They wish for prosperity. May your fields be fruitful. They wish for health, happiness, and occasionally, very specific anatomical blessings that would make a modern audience deeply uncomfortable. Each toast requires another drink. The bride and groom are getting drunk along with everyone else. For nobles, there are also entertainers. Jesters perform comedy, often at the couple's expense. Acrobats tumble through the hall. Musicians play for dancing. Dancing is a huge part of the celebration. Line dances, circle dances, partner dances. Everyone participates, from the oldest grandmother to the youngest child. The dances are energetic, sweaty, and chaotic. People hold hands, spin, stomp. It's one of the few times medieval people of all classes mingle and touch each other physically. For peasants, the dancing is even more important. It's entertainment they can actually afford. No hired performers, just the village playing instruments and singing. As night falls, the party intensifies. More ale flows, more songs are sung, the jokes get cruder. And then, at some point, the bedding ceremony begins. This is the part everyone's been waiting for. The guests, led by the bride's and groom's attendants, escort the couple to the bedroom. They're loud, singing, shouting, banging on pots and pans. It's a parade, designed to draw maximum attention to what's about to happen. For nobles, specific rituals are followed. The bride is undressed by her female attendants, often the groom's mother and sisters. They inspect her, preparing her for her husband. Meanwhile, the groom is undressed by his male friends. They make jokes, offer advice, tease him mercilessly. Then both are led to the bed, wearing only nightclothes or sometimes nothing at all. The priest blesses the bed, sprinkling it with holy water. He says prayers for fertility and faithfulness. And then, finally, the guests leave. Mostly.